Hi everyone, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Whippo, and today I'm going to be discussing blogs as stealth dissent. In particular, I'll be discussing a paper written by Za and Perlmutter, and the title of the paper is 18 Touchdog Newspaper and the Tactics, Ambiguity, and Limits of the Internet Resistance in China. As Za and Perlmutter see it, there's two issues in dissent communication that create a paradox. The first issue is how people communicate across borders, both cultures, symbol systems, and language. And as we all know that not everybody speaks the same language, cultures are different, symbols are different. The second issue is the rise of when people try to communicate their discontent in a political system that is oppressive. And the paradox lies in the example that the authors use to illustrate their point. China is quickly expanding their internet footprint, and at the same time they're trying to severely restrict any political opinions on blogs. China's major success in economics is their ability to produce large quantities of things such as computers and software. And yet at the same time, it might be their downfall because it means there's more of those things out there for their own people to use and more dissenters having equipment to do it with. So anyhow, these two things come together, and by and large it might spell China's dissent or their undoing. So the question that's asked in the paper is, how do the dissenters operate? And the authors of this wrote a case study on a well-known Chinese blog that dissents, and at the same time seems to keep the editors out of jail. According to them, there's three kinds of dissent in controlled societies. Most common is the indirect, which we're all familiar with. That's the small group, interpersonal conversations, gossip, rumor, types of things we do at home. And then there's a samizdat, which is Russian, and it means to publish oneself. And a good example of this type would be the Gulag Archipelago that was written by Solzhenitsyn, and it first appeared in that manner in Russia. And then, of course, the visual or verbal allusions with irony and allegories, metaphors, and symbols and such. But the thing is that the people that use these in a restrictive society have to be very careful. And when they're walking between allegory and reality, the blogger is walking a very thin line. As a matter of fact, in 2002, the RAND Corporation conducted a study on the internet about dissent and censorship in China. And what they found was that the government is making inroads in controlling online, but RAND also came to the conclusion that in the long run, the dissenters will probably win out. However, on the negative side for the dissenters anyhow is that if they are caught, they will do jail time. And Chinese jails, I don't think, are very pleasant places to be. Therefore, it's necessary for the dissenters to develop methods for giving their option without drawing the attention of the authorities. Or excuse me, giving their opinions without drawing attention to the authorities. And they accomplish this by using illusion in their blogs. The blog that was picked for this study, for this paper, was 18 Touchdog Newspaper. And they were picked because they appear to be doing a very good job at nuance in their paper, so well that at times some people don't really understand what they're talking about. This may give them an advantage against the government because they can always have plausible deniability. Also, some people have likened this newspaper to George Orwell's Animal Farm, which was also an allegory about Soviet revolution and the outcome of some citizens being more equal than others. Although the blog itself is broken down into different sections, as you can see in this slide, the majority of the news is about dogs and people or dogs and other animals. However, these stories are supposed to be metaphors for the situation in China and how bad things are in comparison to the rest of the world. And as a matter of fact, in 2004, the newspaper won an international weblog award, and the reason they won it was because the judges thought they did a fantastic job of nuance. And here, let me quote one of the judges that made the selection, and this guy's name is Guido Baumhauer, and he states, quote, "The blog constituted a successful metaphor for the situation of people living in China and other nations by presenting the unfair conditions suffered by dogs in China and Asia compared to the treatment of animals in the Western world," unquote. And from that, it appears that TouchDog is doing a really great job of getting the word out to the rest of the world about the conditions in China by talking about how poorly dogs are treated there as compared to the rest of the world. In the case of the international award, there was only one judge who spoke Chinese, and apparently, according to the editor of the Dog magazine, she didn't do a very good job of explaining to the other judges the full context of the paper, and so they awarded it to him based on her description of the animals. And this is where we see the issue with signs and symbols not being easily interpreted across borders. However, even though they won the award, if you look at these statistics right here, these statistics do not support the notion that the judges made about the blog showing more Chinese dogs in worse conditions than the world. And as you can see from these statistics, there's an issue with the number of dogs being treated poorly in China versus the Western world. The numbers are actually lower for the Chinese than in the West. And so these statistics do not seem to support the argument that the dog news is telling the outside world that humans in China are treated poorly. So what's going on? Well, either the editors are really extremely clever in disguising the metaphors, or they are what they say they are, a blog that makes observations about everyday life in China and dogs. This is my takeaway from this paper. Ambiguity. This is a word which the authors use at the beginning of the paper and at the end, and they use it for a very good reason. All the information that's been presented could fall into one of two categories depending on your desires and wishes. The first is that dog news paper is truly a paper of dissent, and the other possibility is that no, it's just about everyday life and no political views whatsoever. How dog news is perceived is strictly dependent on your point of view. And there's no doubt that there's a great deal of euphemism, satire in the paper. However, what it conveys and what it's supposed to convey is up in the air because only the authors know for sure. The bottom line is this. What Za and Perlmutter were getting at, I believe, is that communication in general, and dissent communication in particular, where the words are nuanced or not clear, you will see what you want to see. Be careful of falling into the trap of seeing what's not there or being blind to what is there. I think it's a cautionary tale. Several years ago, a well-known author, Dr. Wayne Dyer, wrote a book called You Will See It When You Believe It. And just like that title, I believe that the authors of this article are trying to warn us about the mistake of believing before we see or fully understand the evidence. And the paper's conclusions are ambiguous, and that's what made it a fun read.